What a morning. Let's all settle in. Shabbat Shalom. As we prepare for the holidays, in this season for self-examination and reflection about our lives in matters big and in matters seemingly small, we might ask ourselves, how am I doing? Am I living up to my values in the most important ways to me? We can look at the big picture, zoom out as much as possible, and we can also look at the seemingly mundane measures of who we are and how we are in this world. Because the seemingly mundane, the little things, of course, they add up. And the little things are part of who we are from the perspective of others and in how we view ourselves on a daily basis. I'll share a story of an everyday ethical dilemma. And I'll ask you what you think, and then I'll share some perspectives from the Jewish tradition on the question. Here's the story. A friend once asked for my opinion as a rabbi. There was a little bit of a big buildup, and it's not the first time that someone, of course, has asked me to advise on matters of faith or ethics or practice. So I prepared myself to give her a very thoughtful response, and I was, of course, very serious. And then the question for rabbinic opinion was about the ethics of laundry. No joke, the ethics of laundry. A little bit of a joke, but it was true. My friend had picked up her clean clothes from the laundromat. And to all the young people here, the laundromat is the place where you go to wash your clothes if you don't have a washing machine in your house, or you don't have access to your parents' washing machine. So she picked up her clothes from the laundromat, and she found a shirt that did not belong to her. And so she asked me, what is the most valid course of action according to Jewish law? And she presented a few options. So as I read her list, each of us please think to ourselves, what might you do in this situation? So first A, assuming the shirt fits you and you like it, keep it. B, throw away or recycle the shirt in some way. C, donate the shirt to charity, to someone who might need it. D, return the shirt to the laundromat in case the original owner comes looking for it. So what do we think? Okay, who would keep it?
My kid would.
Son Fradkid's child would. Who would either throw it away or give it to charity, find some use for it, recycle it? Okay. Who would try to return it to the laundromat? Okay, we have a lot more hands than I even expected. So these are all reasonable. And so before I give an answer from our tradition, which is found in this week's Torah portion, I invite you to think about what you would do and in the context of how do we make these everyday moral decisions. What do we do when the laundromat makes a mistake? Or maybe it's the dry cleaners here. This week's Parsha offers a very clear answer. If you see your fellow's ox or sheep gone astray, do not ignore it. You must take it back to your fellow. Hashev teshivim le'achicha. You should do the same with your donkey. You should do the same with your garment, the shirt. And so too shall you do with anything that your fellow loses and you find. You must not remain indifferent. Lo tuchal lehitalem. You must not remain indifferent. Based on this Torah law, this is from the book of Deuteronomy, the section that we read this morning, the rabbis developed an entire field of civil law. around the obligation to return lost objects. It's called Hashavat Avedah. So I studied this halacha from my teacher, Rabbi Danny Nevins, and so I will share some of what I learned with you in his name this morning. First, how do we know if an item is lost? How can we tell? And the answer is intuitive. Basically, an item is lost if it looks lost. So for example, we learn in some of traditional rabbinic law called the Midrash Halacha that if you see a cow grazing in a field, so of course livestock is in the category of property, we learn that if the cow is grazing in the field and does not look lost, then no need to interfere. We assume the cow is okay and not lost. But a cow walking in the vineyards, which is where cows don't normally graze, where it shouldn't be, or if we see an ox, which is a beast of burden, an animal who carries a load, if the load has been overturned, if the package has fallen over off his back, then we should get involved and try to return the animal, which is the lost property, to its owner. That's how we know if something counts as lost, first. Second, how far does our responsibility extend? So in terms of distance, the rabbis of the Talmud in Tractate Bava Metzia consider a wide range of options. All the way from, well, you're only responsible if you're close enough to touch the object. This is called pekiyah, touching, if you're in the touching category. So that's just this area, whatever I can touch. Two, they even debate a length as far away as I can see, so farther than even the back of the room, as far away as I can see, re'iyah, the category of how much a person could see in the distance. And ultimately, they settle on a middle ground of about 500 feet, just a reasonable compromise. So, proximity, how far away is the object? The next key factor in deciding what to do with a lost object is if the object is identifiable. This affects whether the owner has any expectation that they will find it again. So the language used is whether it has a siman, whether it has an identifying mark. So keys, as an example. Sometimes your keys are identifiable. If you have a really cute keychain or something like that, if you have is it called an air tag? If you have an air tag, then your keys are very identifiable to you. Something that's less identifiable, an example would be cash. So the cash from your pocket doesn't have your name on it. No one would know that it belonged to you necessarily. Your phone, very identifiable. There's some kind of app that allows you to identify whose it is, and the person can also usually find the phone based on its technology. So, two factors: proximity, how close is the item, and also identifiability. So back to the lost shirt that my friend mistakenly received from the laundromat. I would say, so remember what your answer was back a million years ago when we talked about that, the multiple choice question. So trying to return the shirt to the laundromat makes some sense. If the shirt has enough identifying characteristics, so if it's a t-shirt, maybe we assume a blank t-shirt, but any other kind of shirt would presumably have enough identifying characteristics that we would return it to the laundromat. And it's also very physically close if you received it in your bag of laundry, so it's in your possession. And we could go on and on. I won't give you more of the technicalities, although I would love to study it with you one day if you would like to study this part of the Talmud. But what I see here is a beautiful example of the rabbis evaluating how do we make everyday ethical decisions. How do we make sure that we are living out our values even in those small ways, even in those small moments? The Sfat Emet, who was a Hasidic master teacher in 19th century Poland, taught that every day a bat kol, a heavenly voice, would announce or continues to announce, that a very valuable lost object has been found and is waiting to be claimed. And in his teaching, this very valuable lost object is the Torah itself. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. The Torah itself, the Torah is the lost object. And I assume he means either a scroll, the Torah scroll, or more likely the Torah itself as a representative for our tradition, representing the whatever value we need it to represent. Our small deeds matter in a big way if the Torah is a lost object, if the Torah can be a lost object. And so if we can lose and reclaim not only objects, but also the intangibles like our values and our tradition, which is the metaphor of the Torah. So in this month of Elul, we are making a personal accounting of our lives in preparation for Yom Kippur. So I hope we can not lose track of how these small things constitute our moral fabric, just like the big things do. So a few questions. What obligations do we have to each other? What obligations do we have to strangers? How far does our obligation extend? And in the context of our community, thinking of the lost object as the Torah itself, how do we claim or reclaim our connection to Judaism, to our tradition? How do we claim or reclaim our connection to this community, our connection to Bethel? And so I invite us to find a way to be present here for the upcoming holidays. In just 2 weeks, if you can believe it, we will gather here in this sanctuary for our main service, which will be also live streamed, and in our beautiful chapel next door for our Kol HaNeshama service. And we will gather in the backyards of members of our community who've opened their homes up for a more informal service in their homes. We will also gather across the street at the church, and we will also gather in Greenwich Park across the street. So there are a lot of ways to be present here for the holidays. Whatever our background or practice, just like we claim lost objects, when we find those simanim, those signs, those identifying characteristics, those pieces that we recognize as so inherently and deeply ours, so too I hope that we are all empowered to find the simanim that allow us to claim what's most important to us in this season, and that we can help each other to hold on to it and ultimately to bring it home. Shabbat Shalom.